Welcome to the Ask April Porter podcast, where franchisee performance meets real-world business strategy. I'm April Porter, attorney, former judge and multi-unit franchisee, and the authority on franchisee performance. Each week, I share actionable insights, proven strategies, and inspiring conversations with top entrepreneurs and franchise leaders, all to help you grow your franchise or small business to achieve what I call swag: sanity, wealth, and gratitude. Success without sacrifice. To claim your swag, apply these hard-earned lessons from seasoned entrepreneurs. We're going to do that now. Let's dive in. On this week's episode, we have Brad Poulos, who is visiting us from Canada, not in the studio, but virtually. Welcome, Brad. We're excited to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Brad is an entrepreneur, educator, and advisor who has spent 40 years building, scaling, and studying small businesses. He has worked in corporate. He's scaled a startup to number 8 on the Profit 100 list. He's taken a company public. He's helped launch and grow multiple ventures as a founder. And he is a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University. So, Brad, it sounds like you've kind of done it all when it comes to business. Would you agree?
I don't know about done it all, but I've done a lot of things. Certainly I have a broad, if not so deep, set of experience for sure.
Yeah, I mean, most people in small business, I think you've got a couple of unique views. I mean, the opportunity to take a company public is something most small business owners will never really encounter. When did you do that?
That was about 18 years ago now that I did that. So, yeah,
Yeah, that
a while
had to
back.
be a wild ride. What kind of business was that?
So it started out, it's interesting because it underwent metamorphosis a couple of times. So it started out as a very modest microwave. At the time in Canada, there was actually a very robust microwave equipment manufacturing industry that just doesn't really exist anymore. So we started the company with the intent of selling testing equipment and components and things to these manufacturers. And that was in the early 90s. And then what happened around the late 90s was all the wireless systems, so the cellular system, went digital. And that created a huge opportunity in Canada and elsewhere, of course, in the United States just as much. In fact, the United States led it for us to kind of switch away from microwave, which was kind of dying, to the wireless industry. So we went and acquired the right sets of equipment so that we could sell that primarily to the big carriers here in Canada, but also to the carrier adjacent businesses. So the people that install the networks and service them, and to some degree manufacturers. And then we expanded on that business by adding services. So we started putting up towers and doing a service for the carriers and all of that sort of thing. And that was the business that we ultimately took public.
You know, I think that's such an interesting point because I'm talking to small business owners all the time, as I'm sure you are as well, who are stuck in the weeds, right? They're focused on day to day. They're always looking at what's right in front of them because they're just trying to keep their heads above water. And one of the things that I really try to emphasize is how we have layers of business that we should be looking at. I'm an attorney in addition to the other things I do. So I always have that legal aspect, running around in the back of my brain. But there's what's going on in your business, the day to day. And then there's a lot of outside influences, such as what are the legal regulations and what's happening in your local community that could impact your business. And then from there, the state government, and then from there, the national government, and then the trends that are happening, consumer trends and technology trends and all these different things. And what I find is that small businesses often, when they're focused on the day to day, miss the trends. And in the trends is a lot of opportunity to be first in something like what you're talking about, is realizing, hey, the industry we're in is kind of on its way out and this new technology is coming. And how do we jump on board early instead of having to react to it once it's already impacted our business, which is where the gold is.
Yeah, it's really important, of course, to keep your eye on what's going on outside of your business as well. In fact, There's a great book called The E-Myth. Well, actually, I think the current one is called The E-Myth Revisited, and they talk in that book. That's where they coined the term working on the business, not in the business, and you have to carve out some time to do that. Now, I was lucky because I was running a business with my brother and another partner. So we were able to compartmentalize the various functions, and to a large degree, one of my jobs was really to have that kind of forward-looking view and to make sure that we were taking advantage of new opportunities as they came along, while the other two guys were really heavily focused on operations and making sure that the business ran well.
Yeah,
Now,
that
the
is
other
an
thing is, though,
advantage.
it's not vital that you're first.
No, I
So,
agree. Sometimes it's good to not be first because you let somebody else make the mistakes and put in a lot of money going down a path that I think we're seeing that right now in AI. I don't know how much you're following AI, but ChatGPT is facing a bunch of lawsuits over the way that it's handling IP. People are realizing, and again, from the legal standpoint, people are realizing that when they say that it's private, it's not necessarily private. And so your IP is now not only being used to train the model, but can also be filtered out to create other tools that they will monetize and make money off of your genius. So, and that's a good business model until people figure it out. Right? Which is so now, like, we're working with another AI company right now that saw that and saw, like you said, "This is not going well. Businesses are not going to want this. People are not like, there's a market for protected IP." So they built a whole 'nother LLM off the ground that is 100% closed loop and protected and, will never cannibalize your IP. And so it's just now hitting the market, but I fully expect we're gonna see a huge surgence from it because it sees where the others have maybe created a gap that will lose fandom as soon as there's
yeah,
another opportunity, right? A choice.
that comment makes me think about a few things. The first of all, but back to the issue of first mover advantage. So I teach entrepreneurship. So a lot of the time I ask my students, have you guys ever heard of first mover advantage? And of course, a handful put their hand up and I go, well, guess what? There isn't one. It's called first mover disadvantage. And if you don't agree with me, let me tell you a story about, well, hey, what spreadsheet do you use? Right. And they'll all say Microsoft Excel. And I say, well, back in the 80s, because I'm old, I used to use one called VisiCalc, which got kicked out by Lotus 123, which got kicked out by Excel. So how would you like to be VisiCalc? And then the other one is, when was the last time you logged on to your MySpace account?
Mhm.
Oh, so that. But also to the point, the specific example you gave about AI. I was actually doing a radio interview earlier today about the Manitoba government. So one of the provinces in Ontario, one of the provinces in Canada, is looking at passing legislation around algorithmic pricing. So this is the notion of giving you a different price from me. It's not the same as market-based mechanisms like Uber surge pricing. I think, you can argue that that's fair because that's a market mechanism and it actually can help the consumer because in the case of Uber surge pricing, it brings more drivers onto the scene when they're needed. So
Right.
unfortunately, you might have to pay more, but you get a taxi when it's minus 30 out and you'd really like to get one. But they're talking about using your private data to determine what price to give you. And I think it's going to backfire big time on the company when people figure out that this is being done. The trust will be lost, and companies like the one that you were mentioning that's developing the new AI tool are going to come out on top because I think people are just growing very, very tired of having their privacy invaded in the way it is today.
Right. It's this like, I think we're constantly being beat over the head, quite frankly, with the presumption by these companies that the individual user is powerless. And people don't like to feel powerless. And, especially here in Western civilization, where we've been taught that power is in the people. So, I do think that with everything, it's a pendulum. There's a tipping point, and as it gets more exposed, then the market will ultimately decide. And I think we'll see that the power still resides with the people.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. That's right. And before the robots take over, right? So, okay, so that's really interesting. What are some other things that you're seeing right now, even in this generation that's coming up that you're teaching that is making you think about where the future of entrepreneurship is going?
Well, one thing is that because it's tougher and tougher now for students that graduate from either high school, probably not so much high school, but certainly college and university, to get entry level jobs, partly because of AI, but also just partly because of other economic forces. More and more of them are actually thinking about doing their own thing. And it's why I think entrepreneurship is a really important skill, and it is a skill. It's something that you can learn. Some of us are perhaps a little more naturally inclined to develop those skills, but it is something that can be taught. It's sort of tacit knowledge. You have to learn it by doing, kind of like the piano, but it can be, and anybody can learn it to some degree. And I think almost everybody at some point is going to find themselves in a position where they're looking for something to do, and the job market may or may not be favorable at that moment in time. So having some entrepreneurial skills will help you in that way. And then, of course, it can even help you in your job. Entrepreneurial thinkers are certainly rise to the top in any organization. So
I agree 100%. In fact, I was part of a startup a few years ago. It was a fintech startup. And when they brought me in, they were looking to convert the whole thing over to a franchise. So they brought me in as the strategist to figure out how to do that. And when they decided to bring me in, they had quite a few executives. And I'm like, this is a startup. We don't have a whole lot of doers. We've got a lot of executives around here. But when we really started to evaluate and what I was showing them and like why we might be stuck, I remember one of the people on the board said, "What we need is we need entrepreneurs. We need entrepreneurs to come in here." And I'm like, 100%, because entrepreneurs, they know how to dig in, get it done, build it from the ground up, and then hopefully grow into that executive um, role from there. That's the dream,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. In fact, I teach my students that a startup is not a small version of a big company,
No.
right? It's an entirely different animal.
Yes, yes. That is, I mean, one of the things I teach too is how our traditional institutionalized school system really has done entrepreneurs a disadvantage and, programming us to show up and behave like employees. And it serves the ramp up period of a business, particularly when you combine that with leadership skills and creative and some empathy of understanding the psychology of other people. But then that's also what gets people stuck and having to get out of that and overcome that. I'm sure you've had conversations like that both in your classes and also with the businesses that you work with. What are some of the ways that you help people make that mindset shift and break those habits that are holding them back?
With business owners. So it can be tough because by the time people are an owner of a business, quite often they're a little longer in the tooth and a little bit set in their ways. So sometimes it's actually about building a team around them. I'm a big component of teams. I don't think you can fund any startup that was a one person business, right? It's all about the team. In fact, we have a model that we teach called the talent triangle that says basically you have to have there's three kind of things you have to have in any startup team. It doesn't necessarily have to be three people. It can be two, but it can't be one. You have to have somebody who's a good sort of just a good business person. We call it business acumen, so they're wise. They'll make good business decisions. It's not necessarily tied to any specific domain or industry or anything like that. It's just kind of general business wisdom. And then you have to have that domain person. You have to have somebody who knows the industry. It's really tough to break into an industry if you don't know anything about it. Because every industry has what I call the dirty little secrets, right? And they're not dirty and they're not really secret, but they're known to the people that are in that industry. And a good example is, let's say you've got a startup and you've got a new energy bar and you want it. So where would you try to place that? Well, you'd try to get that into maybe grocery, probably smaller ones before bigger ones. There might be a few other places other than online. I'm talking about, physical locations. So maybe, I don't know, maybe gyms or something like that. if you don't know how those industries work, you can spend a lot of time learning the hard way how they do work. So it's much better to have somebody on your team, either directly on the startup team or at least a virtual member of your team that can do that. And then the last area is somebody the operational experience. So if you're a software company, it's the person who knows how to write software or how to get software written if you're not doing it yourself. You have to have those three things. Everything else you can buy, you don't have to know how to keep the books. To some degree you can outsource functions like marketing and even sales, but you need to know how the industry works. So sometimes that's the solution, and other times people rise to the occasion. A lot of it has to do with letting go, so that you create time for yourself to work on the business, to be thinking, to be looking outside as opposed to inside. And so that's very difficult for a lot of businesses. I have what I call the $8 million, and it actually comes from my brother and I coined this term when we worked together because we had a lot of suppliers that were in that kind of like $8 to $10 million range in sales. And we sort of saw the way they ran their business, which was quite different from the way we ran ours, in that they made every single decision themselves. And you can do that if you're okay staying at $8 million. But if you want to grow above that, you've got to let go. You have to be ready to let other people make decisions, to accept the fact that maybe they might not even make the same decision you would or as good of a decision as you would, but maybe it's good enough. Not every single thing has to be fully optimized in your business. And the value that you get from doing that, from letting go, is that you now have your time freed up to work on more important things, right? So I have a funny story actually around that. My very, very first career was in the jewelry industry. And I worked for a fellow, his name was Romeo, and, God rest his soul. And he once said to me, you know, I could be making $10 million selling diamonds, but I'm too busy fixing watches. And it's, and it's a perfect example. Now I'm not sure the 10 million was accurate, but the principle is accurate in the sense that he was spending too much time fixing watches. He should have hired a watchmaker and worked on growing the business.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so hard. That is the hardest part, is shifting from I gotta do to get this to work into I need to lead, I need to lead, I need to lead to get this to work, you know?
Yeah.
And so many people aren't really taught how to lead. I find that a lot of entrepreneurs, they establish their leadership skills not based upon like being educated in leadership or studying leadership or finding out best practices, but more on doing the opposite of what a bad boss did to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people start businesses because of a bad boss, and you almost have to thank them. you know and there is a second order impact too from this notion of letting go and empowering people. And what it is the really good people, they want to be empowered, and they want to be given more and more and more, and you'll lose them if you don't do that. So then what ends up happening is you've got a company full of B players that are okay with being told what to do all the time.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is 100%. I agree with you. In fact, we're working right now with we work with franchisees, and then we'll also work with their managers sometimes. And so I have a manager who sometimes will say to me, like, well, I'm trying to do this, but my owner won't let me. They want to do it this way. And I'm like, okay. Then I go back to the owner and I'm like, how is this working out? What if you let that go? What if you allowed so and so to do it? Right. So we kind of have an advantage there when we can work with both of them. But, but it is so true because when you truly find people, we talk about this all the time. I'm sure you do too, as Brad. When you find people who are truly aligned with your values and the mission behind what you're doing and what impact you're making, they are they are self motivated to go farther and faster in your business, and often you are the one that is holding them back, from winning the race.
Yeah, and if you don't give them a chance, they're gonna go and they're gonna start their own business, and maybe they'll end up being a better leader than you because they get it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So, well, what is if you had to give your best piece of advice to an owner who's in that tipping point where they're ready to scale but they're kind of stuck and struggling to let go, or maybe they're aware of it, maybe they're not aware that that's the problem, like so many aren't, but what's your number one piece of advice to give people?
Well, I'd probably start with analyzing who I've got on my team. Making sure that we have the right people in the right seats. And so that's the right people means that they share your values. So most people can be trained to do most jobs. And certainly if they're doing a certain job, they must know something about it. So if they're not bang on from a technical point of view, that can probably be fixed either with some hand holding, some on the job training, maybe some external training, but it's really, really hard to teach values. Those are quite innate. So quite often you'll find that before you can scale, you've got to make sure that you get the right people in the right seats, and that might involve getting some people out of their seat and maybe in a different seat in the company. If they're the right person in the wrong seat, that's kind of possibly fixable, but if they're the wrong person in the right seat, then you probably have to say goodbye to them. But you can't it's hard to scale until you do that. So I
Yeah.
actually start with the people.
I agree with you. And I do think it's hard when you've been surrounded by people who've served you well to get to the point you're at, but they're not the right people to take you to the next level. And it is hard,
Yeah.
but you and your business will outgrow some of the people on your team.
That certainly happened to us once we went public. There were a handful of people that, we tried for quite some time to kinda drag them along, but as the business changed, one really good example is when, we went public, we had to have a CFO and they had to be a CA, but we had a controller. And that controller was like, they were the big boss of that part of the company prior to going public. And now all of a sudden they have a big boss. And we tried several ways to get that person to kind of, come along with on the journey, including I created a role for that individual that reported directly to me and was in charge of another area of the company so that they didn't feel like they were stifled by the CFO. Not that he was stifling anybody, but it didn't work. And so eventually we had to let that individual go.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is part of growing as a business. And that's, I think, part of the side of business that really isn't talked about very often is that emotional intelligence component, where if as a business owner, if you don't grow in your emotional intelligence to where you can separate the personal and the business and the emotion and the logical decision that is right for the business, then you're creating a lot of turmoil and anxiety and not a very pleasant place to exist inside of your body, because you're carrying around reactionary emotions instead of being able to step back and be more objective.
Yeah, and it's cliche, but to some degree, you're doing both of you a favor because if the person's not a good fit any longer, then they're probably not going to advance any further in your organization. So they've now plateaued. They're probably not that happy, and you're certainly not happy. So like I say, you're probably doing both of you a favor. It won't be seen that way in the moment, which is fine, but in the long run, it's probably almost always true.
Yeah. The one thing that I think is hardest for small business owners is realizing when you are that person and that you've exhausted everything you know how to do in the business, and shuffling more stuff around that you know how to do is not going to take the business up. It's going to keep it just like chaotically looking from right to left and front to back. And the answer there is like, and this is again something I don't think really is talked about enough, is that you have to get help. You have to get and start working with someone who knows more than you do, whether you bring in a CEO for your company or you work with someone like you, Brad, or someone like me who's got the experience and been there and is teaching other people how to do it. Unfortunately, I think that there's this whole, kind of mystery around business ownership until you're in it. And part of the message is anyone can be a business owner. Like, and you don't have to go to school and you don't have to do all you have to do is have passion and a talent for something. And you can build as big of a business as you want to build. And it's like, no, you can start a business that way. But you're going to have to learn how to you're gonna have to learn a lot of things and evolve as a business owner if you really want to grow it.
Yeah, the best so I kinda get self-selected in the sense that the people that I work with are the people who have realized that they do want and need help. The ones that don't, I never hear from them, and they may or may not still be in business. There's no way for me to ever know. But most of the people that I've worked with over the years, and virtually everybody that I work with at the university, are lifelong learners. They're constantly learning, right? Voracious readers, eyes always open, learning not just through reading, but also, going doing industry events, finding out what the competition's doing. But that's the other thing is most industries are actually have friendly competition, and so a lot can be learned from your competitors. In fact, like most industries are what's called co-opetition, right? Yeah, we compete, but the industry's big enough for all of us, and we don't have
Right.
to hate each other. And hey, maybe even from time to time we can send each other business. Like
Yeah.
my dad was in the motel business, and that's an interesting one because you're constrained by the number of units that you have. And so when you're full, who do you send the people who came into the office to? The
Right.
ones that you get along with.
Exactly. Yes, your network of people from your industry, 100%. Yeah, I agree with you. And I agree with you. I do think that's an interesting thing in working with franchisees. That is a little bit different than the people who find you because they're looking for help. So the franchisees, one of the reasons people are attracted to buying a franchise is because they presume someone, the franchisor, is just going to tell them what to do and how to do it, which the franchisor does as far as teaching them how to run the day, like the day to day of the business. But the franchisor doesn't teach how to get out of the day to day and scale the business. But a lot of people get stuck there. And when we're working, particularly when we start to work with a franchisor, because they see people are stuck and they want us to work for the franchisees, and we're talking to people about this, there's still a number of franchisees who are like, but I shouldn't have to pay anybody else to teach me anything. I paid the franchisor. It's like, well, franchisor is not going to teach it. So what are you going to do? Right. But
That
that's,
seems like an opportunity for franchisors actually to include some basic leadership training for their franchisees.
well, they do. Well, actually, leadership training is a little off limits here in the US because it opens franchisors to what's called joint employer liability, where
Okay.
they could be seen as a joint employer of the franchisee's employees by exerting too much control over what those employees are doing. So that prevents that from happening. But they do give a lot of like basic marketing skills and basic sales skills. And that takes people to profitability. I mean, franchise businesses are good businesses, but it doesn't take people to the point of being able to delegate and getting that emotional intelligence and the other things that create a better quality of life, even if the person doesn't want to scale into more locations. So that's where I think a lot of like education on the front end is important about what is expected, what are you going to have to do on your own, the fact that you do have to be a lifelong learner if you really want to build a true business empire, and you want to look for the right partners along the way who've been there, done it, and that you align with, and you can learn from them. So
Would think then that the good franchisors are looking for those qualities in their franchisees over and above the basic managerial ability, having enough capital and all of the other requirements that they've got. Picking people that have the ability to get to that next level would probably be important.
Yes, yes, and have that self-starter instead of I came into franchising to wait for someone to teach me. It's like, I came in, give me what you got, and then I'm gonna run it to the finish line, right? 2 different
Yeah,
mentalities there that define the underperformers or the mid performers from the top performers.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like they see that they're okay. I'm spending money every month and upfront to buy a system that's going to take some of the risk out, but the business is still on me to,
exactly.
to grow.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And being excited for that, right? Like now, so I'm excited that I control my own destiny, and I'm excited that I'm going to learn, I'm going to figure it out and grow this thing and really take it to the next level. And those are the people that I love to work with. I'm sure those are the people that you love to work with too, Brad.
We all like to spend our time around smart people.
Well,
That's sure.
on that note, I think that it's a perfect way to end this episode because I know that I have spent my time today with a very smart person. Brad, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show and speaking with you. How can our listeners find you?
Sure. So my name's Brad Poulos, Poulos. My website is exactly that. You can find me on LinkedIn or on my Amazon author page. Any of those three are perfectly valid.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us in this episode, and we'll see y'all next week. All right. Thanks for tuning in to the Ask April Porter podcast. If you found value in today's episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow franchisees and small business owners. To access the resources I mentioned during this episode, check out our show notes.